What if I told you that the most dangerous person in any room isn't the loud one demanding attention, but the quiet one sitting in the corner who's been pushed too far? Stay with me, because what Carl Jung uncovered about the human mind could completely shift how you see empaths forever. Carl Jung believed that every person carries both light and shadow within them. And this truth is seen most clearly in the misunderstood empath. Many people confuse empathy with weakness, but Jung's work revealed something far more complex and far more powerful. Here's what most never realize about empaths, and by the end of this, you'll never look at one the same way again. According to Jung, the human psyche operates on many levels. The persona, the mask we wear in public, hides who we truly are. But what happens when someone with deep emotional awareness finally takes off that mask? What Jung discovered about the hidden self or the shadow will surprise you. Empaths live inside what Jung called the tension of opposites. They feel everything intensely, yet they've learned how to hold that emotion without letting it consume them. They see deception clearly, but they still believe in people's capacity for goodness. That's not naivety. It's what Jung described as the transcendent function, the power to hold two opposing truths at the same time. But this is where it becomes dangerous and why narcissists should be very afraid. Jung said that the most complete people are those who've confronted their own shadow and become whole. Empaths, through constant betrayal and manipulation, are forced into that process earlier and with greater intensity than most. They don't only understand the light, they know darkness on an intimate level because they've been pushed into it. The narcissist looks at the empath's kindness and makes a fatal mistake. They assume they're dealing with someone fragile, someone they can control. But Jung found that those who lead with their hearts often have the strongest minds and spirits. Why? Because they had to build them to survive. Listen carefully, because this is where everything turns. According to Jung's theory of individuation, every person eventually faces the truth of who they really are. For most, this happens slowly, if ever. But for empaths who've been deeply betrayed, that process speeds up. The pain becomes the fire that burns away illusion, the spark of what Jung called psychological rebirth. And here's the secret most overlook. Emotional sensitivity isn't weakness, it's heightened perception. Empaths don't just feel emotions, they read them, interpret them, remember them. Every lie, every manipulation, every emotional wound becomes information. It's not stored as pain, it's stored as data. And when that data builds to a certain point, something incredible happens. Jung called it the emergence of the self. It's unstoppable. Jung taught that transformation doesn't come from comfort, it's born out of struggle. He described a process called enantiodromia, the tendency for something to turn into its opposite when pushed to extremes. The empath who was endlessly patient becomes completely unshakable. The one who gave endlessly becomes selective. The one who forgave everything becomes final. This isn't about losing compassion, it's about gaining power. Jung understood that true strength comes when you integrate your shadow, when you accept your capacity for saying no, for walking away, for choosing peace over chaos. The empath doesn't lose their heart, they find their backbone. But what happens next will change everything you thought about strength. Jung explained that there's a difference between reacting without awareness and responding with intention. Most people react from their pain. They lash out, they seek revenge, they try to hurt others as they've been hurt. But the evolved empath doesn't do that. They operate from what Jung called conscious choice. They don't need to destroy their betrayer because they've already won the battle that matters most, the one inside themselves. Jung said that the greatest victory isn't conquering others, but conquering the darker parts of your own soul that try to pull you down. And this is the moment when the narcissist realizes they've made a devastating mistake. Jung observed that manipulators depend on predictable reactions. They need you to explain, to chase, to fight, to be understood. But when an empath reaches what Jung called psychological autonomy, those games no longer work. They stop playing entirely. Jung discovered that the most powerful place you can stand is detachment that comes from understanding, not from fear. The awakened empath doesn't pull away because they're wounded. They step back because they finally see clearly. And what happens after that will completely shift your view of power. Jung's research into psychological types revealed that empaths usually have what he called a dominant feeling function. But this isn't emotional instability, it's deep emotional intelligence. They can sense dishonesty, read between the lines, and recognize manipulation even before it unfolds. And here's where the real twist comes in. When this emotional sharpness combines with wisdom gained through pain, it creates something entirely new. The empath stops reacting. They start strategizing. They no longer move from pain, they move from power. Jung had a term for this shift, the transcendent function. It's the ability to hold tension without breaking, to see truth without becoming bitter, to choose response instead of reaction. The empath who has walked through fire develops this transcendent strength at a level most people can't even imagine. They become what Jung called individuated, whole within themselves. They no longer depend on others for approval. They no longer question their worth through someone else's eyes. They stop seeking validation from people who don't understand their value. But this next part might send chills down your spine. Jung described a concept known as psychological mirroring. Empaths naturally reflect the energy that others project onto them. But when they've been betrayed too many times, something changes. They stop reflecting and start revealing. They see through charm, through the fake apologies, through the constant manipulation. They recognize the games instantly. And instead of soaking in that toxicity, they begin to reflect it back. Not with anger, but with truth. And Jung said truth is the most powerful weapon against deception. Then comes the next stage, what Jung called the return of the repressed. When someone hides their real power for too long, it eventually rises, not in chaos, but in clarity. The empath who was once endlessly patient becomes unmovable. They no longer argue, they decide. They don't explain, they act. They don't try to fix what's broken. They remove themselves entirely. That's not cruelty. It's what Jung meant by individuation in motion, the process of becoming whole by claiming your strength. Here's where the psychology gets even deeper. Jung said the shadow doesn't just hold darkness, it holds unused potential. For empaths, that potential includes their ability to set boundaries, to say no, to protect their peace. Betrayal forces them to reclaim these hidden parts. And when they integrate that power, they don't become less kind. They become more selective. They still care, but they choose who deserves that care. Their empathy becomes sacred, something to protect instead of give away blindly. What emerges from this process is what Jung called the individuated self, and it's unstoppable. Jung believed that the most powerful people aren't those acting from unhealed pain, but those who've turned their pain into wisdom. The awakened empath is the perfect example of this. They've seen the darkest sides of humanity and come out refined, not ruined. They understand manipulation because they've survived it. They recognize gaslighting because they've escaped it. They can identify emotional predators because they've been drained by them. That's not paranoia. It's what Jung called earned discernment. And here's where the shift becomes permanent. According to Jung's theory of psychological growth, there comes a moment when a person stops searching for others to complete them and finally becomes whole inside. For the empath who's been betrayed, this moment is both freedom and transformation. They stop proving their worth. They stop explaining their limits. They stop apologizing for protecting their peace. They reach what Jung called psychological sovereignty, complete ownership of their emotional world. And the final transformation is something Jung described as the return to the self. True power isn't about being untouched by emotion, it's about mastering it. Jung discovered that real strength isn't the absence of sensitivity, but sensitivity shaped by wisdom. The empath who once absorbed everyone's pain learns to channel it into awareness, compassion, and clarity. They move through the world quietly powerful, kind but unshakable, gentle but firm, open but protected. The narcissist's power ends where the empath's awareness begins. And once that awareness is awakened, it can never be undone. A fully awakened empath represents this paradox better than anyone else. They feel everything deeply, yet they choose carefully whom to love. They understand people fully, but they interact with caution. They forgive completely, but they never erase the memory of what happened. Carl Jung said that the most balanced and self-aware people are those who can hold both their light and their darkness in their conscious mind without losing either. The evolved empath has learned how to be kind and gentle with those who earn it, and strong and unshakable with those who test it. They have mastered what Jung called the art of an appropriate and conscious response. And here lies the most profound truth that makes them nearly untouchable. According to Carl Jung, the highest level of human growth happens when a person no longer needs others to make them feel whole. The awakened empath reaches this place not by isolating themselves from the world, but by merging all the different parts of who they are, light and shadow, love and pain, strength and softness. They become whole not because they push people away, but because they choose where and with whom to stand. They stop trying to save people who refuse to be saved. They stop chasing those who are committed to running. They stop giving their energy, love, and healing to those who only take and never return it. They no longer pour their light into dark holes disguised as human beings. Instead, they now practice what Jung described as the art of conscious relationships, connecting only when there is honesty, respect, emotional balance, and real care on both sides. The result of this transformation is what Jung called the individuated empath, someone who is whole, balanced, and deeply aware. These individuals are not just strong, they are one of the most powerful forces you will ever meet. Jung said that when a person has faced their own darkness, met their inner demons, and walked out of that confrontation, stronger they become what he described as a true force of nature. They are not destructive, but they are unstoppable. They are not loud or aggressive, but they are absolutely certain of who they are and what they stand for. The fully awakened empath does not seek revenge because they no longer need it. They do not need to prove their value to anyone because they have already met themselves and know their worth on the deepest level. They are no longer afraid of being alone because they have become their own best companion. They have learned to sit in silence and still feel complete. They become what Jung described as psychologically whole beings, people who have turned their deepest wounds into their greatest sources of strength. They are dangerous, not because they harm others, but because they can no longer be harmed in the same way again. They cannot be manipulated, deceived, or broken by anyone's games. And that, according to Jung's lifetime of research and understanding of human nature, is the most terrifying thing for a narcissist to encounter. Someone who has learned to love themselves as fiercely, as passionately, and as faithfully as they once loved others. The empath's path from victimhood to sovereignty is not just a personal victory, it's a spiritual and psychological transformation of the highest kind. It is what Jung called the hero's journey of the human psyche. The empath must descend into their own darkness, face the monsters that live there, and reclaim the pieces of themselves that were lost. When they rise again, they don't just come back healed, they come back transformed. They become both powerful and peaceful, both strong and sacred. Carl Jung discovered that suffering, when it is faced consciously and processed with awareness, turns into the foundation for wisdom. Pain that is understood becomes knowledge. Trauma that is integrated becomes strength. The empath who has walked through emotional fire doesn't simply survive it. They carry the flame forward. They become a light that helps guide others out of their own shadows. They become living evidence of Jung's greatest discovery, that within every wound lies the seed of transformation, and within every heartbreak lives the beginning of spiritual awakening. Every betrayal, every rejection, every moment of despair becomes an invitation, a chance to grow into something stronger, wiser, and more real. The empath learns that the very things meant to destroy them are the same forces that shape them into who they were always meant to be. This journey is not about becoming invincible, it's about becoming authentic. It's about no longer losing yourself for others and instead standing firmly in your own truth. The psychology of the awakened empath is nothing short of profound. Once you understand it, you will never again mistake their quietness for weakness or their kindness for naivety. They are calm because they have faced chaos. They are gentle because they have known pain. They are understanding because they have been misunderstood. They are strong because they have been broken and rebuilt themselves piece by piece. An awakened empath has learned to transform pain into purpose, wounds into wisdom, and heartbreak into healing. Their compassion no longer drains them, it sustains them. Their boundaries no longer separate them from others, they protect what is sacred within them. Their love no longer seeks validation, it radiates freely without attachment. Jung taught that the process of individuation, the integration of the conscious and the unconscious, is the true path to wholeness. The empath's awakening is this process come to life. They have looked into the mirror of their own soul, seen both beauty and darkness, and chosen to embrace it all. They no longer run from pain because they understand it's the doorway to power. They no longer chase happiness because they have found peace within themselves. The awakened empath becomes someone who no longer asks, "Who will love me?" but instead asks, "How can I love wisely?" They no longer ask, "Who will save me?" but instead say, "I have already saved myself." This self-awareness creates a kind of energy that cannot be faked or taken. It is the quiet confidence of someone who has seen hell and learned how to build a garden there. When an empath reaches this level of understanding, they no longer need to explain themselves. Their presence alone speaks volumes. They no longer argue with those committed to misunderstanding them. They no longer try to convince anyone of their truth. They simply live it calmly, powerfully, and with deep authenticity. This is the final stage of Jung's psychological evolution, not perfection, but integration. The empath has united the soft and the strong, the giver and the protector, the heart and the boundary. They are both open and grounded, compassionate and discerning, and that is what makes them truly untouchable. So when you meet a fully awakened empath, understand that you are standing in the presence of someone who has faced their darkness and chosen the light. Someone who has lost everything they once thought they needed and discovered that they were complete all along. Someone who has learned to love not from fear of losing, but from the strength of being whole. This is not weakness, it is mastery. It is not detachment, it is divine balance. It is not arrogance, it is awareness. It is what Carl Jung devoted his life to studying, the journey of becoming whole through the union of opposites. The awakened empath stands as living proof that even the deepest pain can be transformed into power, that love, when guided by wisdom, becomes unshakable, and that the human spirit, when awakened, can rise above every wound, every betrayal, and every darkness it has ever faced. Thank you so much for staying with me through this reflection. If you found meaning in this journey, make sure to subscribe, share this message, and let it reach someone who might need to remember that their pain too can become their power, and that awakening is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of becoming truly whole.